Hello everyone, I hope you all are doing great. Sources of policy formulation. From where we get, from where we uh, adopt policy, from where we take the policy formulation. Number one is societal structural changes, demographic transitions, economic transformation. Demographic transition means the trend of population in any uh, state, in any province, in any country. If you are making a policy for the low benefit people, yeah, the small farmers, so you will see the demographic transition. You will you will research those areas where small farmers are present in a bulk. Then economic transformation. Number two, why we change the policy, why a policy shift occurs, because of regime change. A policy is for a certain policy is benefiting the small farmers of Pakistan. A regime changed, a government changed, and that change changed the policy. The new political elite may have new vision, mission, and agenda for which donors, world institution may aid them in implementation of that policy. So, regime change can change the existing policy and give the better vision, the better version of a policy to the people. Number three, global commitments. We are not living in isolation. We are not living in the age where we don't interact with other people. We are living in a globalized world. We need to interact with each other. States need to interact with each other. Without interaction, you lose allies. You form adversaries. So in global system, so in this connected system, what we need global commitments. We need agendas from other countries. We need commitments from other countries to fulfill our needs. If we are good in, for example, uh, raw materials, we can provide raw material to those countries uh, which lack raw materials to make industrial progress. So, state enters into international conventions which normally need local policy formulation. International commitment is directly related to the local policy formulation. If a local policy is divergent, if a local policy is different from the aspirations of international commitments, that policy cannot be opted, that policy cannot be adopted. Next is pressure groups. These are the source of policy formulation. Government may not reflect the entirety of a project, entirety of a public service, but the presence of pressure groups who pressurize the government to take certain steps for the betterment of people, like agricultural lobbies, like social causes, advocacy groups, can force the states to do something. Court orders. This is also the source of a policy. Superior courts orders for formulating clear policies or review an existing policy while hearing. A court can decide upon any judgment upon any issue regarding the national interest. Court can intervene and court can formulate a clear policy or review a policy or ask the competent authority to review it for the betterment of people. Next is stages of formulation, that from which state a policy undergo policy shift from one stage to another. We discussed slightly in our previous classes, but here it is again initiation of a policy process, then policy formulation, then policy implementation, then policy monitoring and evaluation. Sorry. This is this we discussed in our previous classes. I asked you essentially to remember these points. I draw different diagrams in class. I tried to tell you that how policy undergoes from one stage to another and why it is important to follow a stage. There is a linear model, then non-linear model. We discussed everything regarding this formulation, regarding the stages of the policy. Moving forward, the policy formulation phases. What are the phases? We implemented a policy, we formulated a policy, we draw a policy document, we initiated a policy. So phase 1 is establishment of a task force. Task force means what? What will be the you can say responsibility of a task force? What will be the task force? If we are managing health policies, if we are managing economic policies, the task force differ from each other, differ from one another. In education policy, the task force will comprise the people related to academia. And when we are formalizing the agriculture policy, the people who becomes a task force are the agricultural background with the agricultural knowledge. Phase number two. Number one, a task force has been completed. A task force is devised. What will be the task force do? Task force will diagnose the situation. What is the current situation of that problem? If the problem is solvable, if the problem is manageable without a policy shift, sorry, the task force will, you can say, indicate that diagnosis to the authorities, and the process is rolled back from this point. Phase number 3, production of second draft of the policy. But if the task force diagnosis indicates that the policy shift is required, that we need to change, we need some points to be changed in the policy, in the health policy, let's suppose, in the education policy of Pakistan, let's say that. So it will convert, it will start, it will initiate the third phase, which is the production of first draft. The first draft will be created by the policymakers, in which they will calculate cost and benefit analysis. Then they send their draft to the technical for the ratification of technicalities. That will devise a second draft with some initial changes, with some technical changes, and they send that draft back to the policymakers, and that policymakers start the fourth phase of the policy formulation, which is presented for endorsement in the parliament, in the legislation. They present this document, they present the policy shift, that we need to change certain steps in the policy, and we want the parliament, we want the representative of the government to endorse this. So these are the 4 different phases which needs to be done in the formulation phase, in formulating a policy. Then the policy formulation approval. The concerned ministry gets its approval from competent authority, usually minister in charge. In case of multi-sectional policy, the cabinet. If the affects the province's council of common interest, once approved, it is formally notified. So I read that text from the slide. I hope you all understood this slide, because this is very basic slide which I included in this session to tell you that approval is important, to tell you the importance of approval in policy. We understood the need of the formulation, we understood the need of implementation, but we didn't understand the meaning, the importance of approval. Number one, the concerned ministries. As far as the ministries are concerned, they need approval from competent authority like minister in charge. Now, who is the minister in charge? Who is the minister in charge? Let's say we are talking about agriculture policy. The head of that, the minister, the agricultural minister, is the minister in charge. If we want to change, if we want to make some changes in educational policy, we refer to the competent authority as the education minister. Regarding health, we refer to the health minister. So likewise, in the multi-sectoral policy, in which you can say the 2 sections of a society, in which the opposition and as well as the government can contribute or want to change a policy, so the policy is approved by the cabinet of the government. If the cabinet disapproved any policy, that policy is rejected from that. When we come to the provincial level, there is a CCI, the Province's Council of Common Interest, that will approve the provincial policies. Then when it is approved, the competent authorities and the people notified regarding that policy. Then policy implementation. Policy implementation is it will be executed by civil servants, prepare strategy of implementation. We discussed all this. I included that for your own to revise your previous knowledge. So this is correct implementation. Its essence, they should increase, they should take care of the ethics, they should positive empathy while implementing it. Remember, every precedent is not to be followed. Like it can be, it is. This is last point is very important. Let me yellow this and let me catch a breath for a while. Okay, this is precedent is not to be followed. Every precedent is not to be followed, which means that a policy document delivered from the ministry, the competent authority, in the hands of the civil servants. Now, it is the prerogative of civil servants how to implement that policy. They can implement it regarding to the population by keeping the aspirations of population of a certain areas. Sorry, when they implement this policy, when they try to endorse that policy, it is their responsibility to keep in mind the aspirations of people of that uh, constituency or that part of a city or a part of a country or a part of a UC or anything. So if something is different from the aspiration of people, they can exclude it from the policy. It is their prerogative. It is the prerogative of a sitting officer who is implementing that policy. So you need to remember this last point more accurately when you are discussing implementation in your exams. Policy monitoring and evaluation. It means that a policy is in a cycle. Policy is moving in a cycle. Policy is in a constant shift from one phase to another, and it is monitored at every step. We can monitor, we should, a policy, the policy implementers or the policy conductors or administrators should and must monitor the policy, the validity of the policy, the process of the policy. It is effective in achieving an objective. They can, they will, they should, they must evaluate that they are achieving their objectives. And in a midterm, in a middle of a policy, some corrections, if needed, they can apply those corrections in that policies as well. Periodic revisions of the policy is important, which is the last point of that policy monitoring evaluation. The periodic revision of policy. What is the periodic revision of policy? Periodic revisions means that you need to change from one policy, from one point to another if one agenda is not achieving its goals, if one agenda is failing to give the benefit to the people as discussed or as you can say uh, thought by the policymakers. So periodic revisions of the policy is important. It is not hard and fast rule that once a policy is implemented, it can never be changed. This cannot be the scenario. This cannot be. This can make a policy a bad policy if there is not flexibility in a policy. That policy will be a wrong policy and a very bad policy for the people. So it is important to make a policy very you can say loose-ended or very flexible in its nature, in its conduct as well. A civil servant who is administering a policy should be flexible enough to mend or change a course of a policy. Let me give you an example, a common day example. If you want to go to Lahore, if you want to go to Islamabad, you are at your liberty which road you are going to take. If I say that you must go from GT road, you may find traffic jams, you may encounter different rushy places. But if I say okay, the goal is important, the goal is to reach Islamabad, it is your prerogative how you want to reach it. You can go by trains, you can go by plane, you can go by car, you can go by a bike, on a foot, whatever you want, whatever suits you. So this is your prerogative. This is the prerogative of the implementer, the administrator of a policy. So a good policy is not a rigid policy. A good policy is a flexible policy. Moving forward, features of a good policy, and I relate this to the feature. What is good policy? Legal, constitutional validity, no action against law. These are the points. You can read it from this text that external consistency, no clash with the policy. It means that one policy is not counterproductive to the other policy. For example, I am making an agricultural policy. I am making the small farmers subsidy for the small farmers, and I am on the behalf of educational policy, and they are reacting with each other, which makes a policy a bad policy. So technical feasibility, proposed projects as practical. They cannot be the ideal project. They should be practicable. Resources availability. Before implementation, before a policy implementation, a policy formulation, we should make sure that the resources, adequate resources, are present to implement a policy. If we are asked to make a health policy, we should have the resources regarding our health. We make our inventory, we count our number of our health providers, we count the health transfer vehicles, we count the beds, we count the hospitals, we count the areas where basic health units are available. So this means that we have ample resources to endorse a good health policy. Same goes with the education policy, and as well as for the developmental policy of any project. Financial viability, it means that the project is self-financing. It is generating its own finance. It is not dependent on the government. When initiated, it has the capacity to, it can build its own capacity for the financial self-financing. Okay, then social acceptance. Yes, this is important. Social acceptance means not against social norms and values. A good policy can never be against social norms and values. Then the political commitment fit with political culture, our political culture, the culture of our country, which we are following in our politics. In this, our policy is in harmony with that political culture. It will commit with the political philosophy of our country. Last one is environmental compliance, that we should not make a policy against our environment which can harm our environment. If I say that a policy, industrial policy is to be devised, industrial policy is to be formulated, it should not it should not harm our environment in which we are living. So this is some these are the features of good policy. And the next slide is the Pakistan experience. What is the Pakistan experience? We are talking about the Pakistan experience here. We just established that in Pakistan we used mixed bag policies. We use different policies. Sometimes it is for the betterment of the people. Sometimes it serves its purpose, but sometimes the policy face any failures as well. So in Pakistan's experience, in the experience in which we say we are not having the educate, yeah, we are not having very good policy in Pakistan, which means that we are lacking in some steps. So to ensure that we will have the good policy with us, we will have the good policy formulation with us, we should understand, we should follow each and every step for the formulation of policy. So this is for today. I hope you learned something from this session. Thank you so much, and I will appreciate if you ask questions through your WhatsApp group, and I would appreciate if you communicate with me regarding this class. Thank you so much. Hope to see you soon.